Joan Ashworth stood in the kitchen, her hands damp from rinsing the teacups. The clatter of laughter echoed from the conservatory where Claire, her daughter-in-law, entertained guests with Prosecco and effortless charm. Joan didn't mind being out of sight. She was used to it. She moved with quiet precision, milk first for Oliver, 2 sugars for Claire, no sugar for her. The tray trembled slightly in her grip as she walked past the hallway mirror, catching her own reflection. 70 years old, still sprightly, still invisible. The children, Ben and Isla, called her Nana. They clung to her skirts when frightened, cheered when she picked them up from school, and slept soundly after the bedtime stories she never tired of telling. For 2 years, since the fire had consumed Oliver and Claire's rented home, Joan's house had been theirs too. And with it, her kitchen, her peace, her life. She hadn't complained. Not when Claire changed the curtains to a harsh navy blue. Not when Oliver repurposed her reading room into a home office. Not when she found herself cooking 3 dinners a night to suit each person's preferences. That evening, Joan set down the tray and gently placed the cups before each guest, smiling politely. No one acknowledged her except Ben, who mouthed, "Thank you," before his mother nudged him to sit properly. She returned to the kitchen, wiping her hands as the muffled conversations rolled on. It was then, through the open doorway, she heard Claire's voice rise above the rest. "Oh, Joan. She's just the babysitter, really. We wouldn't manage date nights without her." The room laughed. So did Oliver. Joan's breath caught. Something in her chest, a fragile, patient thing, gave way. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She stood very still, eyes fixed on the fridge magnet her late husband had given her years ago. "You are more than what they see." That night, while the house quietened and the family slipped into comfortable sleep under her roof, Joan sat at the kitchen table alone. A single cup of tea, untouched. In the drawer beside her was the deed to the house. It still bore her name, and hers alone. The following morning was like any other. Claire bustled about, organizing school bags and barking out instructions. Oliver mumbled over his coffee, glued to his phone. Joan moved quietly between them, folding lunch wraps, tying shoelaces, handing out coats. No one noticed the way she avoided eye contact. After they left, silence fell like a comforter across the house. Joan made her tea, 1 bag, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen table, just as she had the night before. But this time, she opened the drawer beside her. The property deed was crisp, folded neatly in its brown envelope. Her name, Joan Margaret Ashworth, was printed in bold letters, unshared. She remembered the day she and her late husband signed it, holding hands as they stepped into their future. That was 26 years ago. He'd been gone 10. She laid the document on the table, smoothing the corners as if it was something fragile. Then she picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in a long while. "Ruth. It's Joan." There was a pause on the other end. "Joan. My word, it's been ages." Ruth Hammond had been a solicitor in the village for over 3 decades. She'd handled the purchase of Joan's home, and the modest will her husband left behind. "I need to talk," Joan said quietly. "And I don't want anyone knowing." They agreed to meet the next morning at Ruth's office. No one would question Joan popping out to buy biscuits. She still ran all the errands. She still made herself small. That evening, Claire came home in a fury because the fish she'd wanted wasn't in stock. She flung her handbag on the kitchen counter and muttered that Joan should check better next time. Oliver didn't even glance up from his tablet. Joan didn't react. She simply placed dinner on the table and nodded when Ben asked for extra mashed potatoes. Her face was unreadable. But her hands, those soft hands that had nursed fevers and tied countless school ties, were steady. Later that night, she placed the deed back in the drawer. She didn't lock it. She didn't need to. No one had opened that drawer in years. As she lay in bed, the ticking of the hallway clock marked each second of a plan long overdue. Joan stepped off the bus with her handbag tucked firmly beneath her arm. The morning air in the village was crisp, and a fine mist clung to the hedgerows like a secret not yet spoken. She walked with purpose, her steps steady but not rushed, blending in with the pensioners doing their shopping. Just another old woman buying biscuits. The bell above the solicitor's door jingled as she entered. Ruth Hammond looked exactly as Joan remembered, her thick grey hair coiled neatly, glasses perched on the tip of her nose, eyes sharp as ever. They sat down in the back office, walls lined with files and faded legal certificates. Joan opened her bag and retrieved the brown envelope. "I want to make some changes," she said quietly. Ruth opened the envelope and scanned the contents, nodding slowly. "Still in your name. That makes things easier." Joan leaned forward. "I want to give the house away. To somewhere that actually does good. Somewhere that won't throw me out when I'm not useful." Ruth paused. "That's a big step, Joan. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." And she meant it. The house wasn't just bricks and windows, it was the last thing in her life she still had power over. And it had become a place of noise and coldness, of being thanked less than the Amazon delivery driver. Joan explained her idea. There was a local charity she'd worked with for years, Pause and Hope, a struggling rescue shelter just outside the village. She donated tins and towels, sometimes helped feed the pups when staff were short. The shelter was always bursting at the seams, and the founder, a kind woman named May, once told Joan they dreamed of opening a second site. By the time she left Ruth's office, the papers had been started. Ruth promised discretion. Joan trusted her. She took the long route home, through the park and past the lake where she and her husband used to feed ducks. She sat on their old bench and let the wind brush against her cheeks, remembering a time when she was someone's first thought, not the afterthought. Back at the house, Claire was yelling on the phone about napkins for a dinner party. Oliver was asleep on the sofa, still in his dressing gown. Joan walked past them unnoticed, the corner of her lips lifted, just slightly. In her room, she reached under the bed and pulled out a biscuit tin, the old kind with roses on the lid. Inside were letters, wedding photos, the drawing Isla had once made of her with a crown on her head. She held it gently, then placed it on top of the deed now returned to its hiding place. That night, Claire asked where the shortbread had gone. Joan smiled and said she'd buy more tomorrow. The days that followed unfolded like pages in a book Joan had read too many times. Breakfasts eaten in silence. Claire's sharp remarks tossed across the table like crumbs. Oliver's absence, both physical and emotional. The children, bless them, were the only bright flickers in a house that no longer felt warm. But something had shifted. Joan felt it in the way she carried herself. She no longer rushed to pick up towels from the bathroom floor. She didn't refill Claire's wine glass before she asked. She no longer lingered at the door waiting for Oliver to say goodnight. She was present, but not participating. Each evening, she added a small item to a box under her bed, a photo frame, a paperback novel, the shawl she loved but hadn't worn in months. By the end of the week, the box was nearly full. It was her way of packing, quietly and without alarm. Ruth had called. The legal paperwork would be ready by Friday. Joan was to come in and sign the final transfer of ownership. After that, the house would belong to Pause and Hope. A second shelter would be born inside the same walls where Claire once complained about dog smells when Joan returned from volunteering. On Thursday afternoon, May from the shelter stopped by. Joan had told her she had a donation to discuss. Claire wasn't home, and Oliver was upstairs on a work call. May stepped inside and gasped softly at the high ceilings and polished floors. "Joan, this house." "I know," Joan said. "That's why it's going to be perfect." They sat in the kitchen, talking like old friends. Joan offered tea, and May brought out a small photo album from her bag, pictures of the rescue dogs, the staff, the cramped space they currently worked in. One image, of a grey whippet curled in a too small basket, stayed with Joan long after May had gone. That evening, Claire noticed a few empty picture hooks in the hallway. "You're not redecorating, are you?" She laughed without looking up from her phone. "No," Joan replied. "Just dusting." The house was quiet that night, unusually so. Even Claire's music was turned down, and Oliver went to bed early. Joan remained at the kitchen table, her tea steaming in front of her. The deed lay beside it, waiting. She took her time writing a letter, not out of malice, but out of clarity. A letter to Oliver, explaining what had been done, and why. She didn't write to Claire. There was no need. Just before midnight, she walked through the house one last time. Her fingers brushed along the banister, the windowsill, the piano no one played. She opened the back door and stepped outside. The garden, wild and soft in the moonlight, looked like it was breathing. She whispered goodbye. The solicitor's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Joan arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her navy coat and soft grey scarf, both pressed the night before. Ruth greeted her with a knowing smile and a pot of tea already steeping on the desk. "You're doing the right thing," Ruth said, sliding the papers across. Joan read every line slowly, savoring the formality of it. Each paragraph felt like a quiet declaration: "I own this. I choose this. I matter." She signed with a firm hand. Then Ruth stamped it, folded it, and placed it in a file marked Transfer of Property, Ashworth to Pause and Hope Animal Trust. "Do you want a copy?" Ruth asked gently. "No," Joan replied. "Let it live somewhere new, just like I will." They talked a little longer, about Joan's plans to move into a small flat in Brighton, walking distance to the sea. Ruth offered to help with the conveyancing. Joan promised to send her a postcard. When she stepped out of the office, the air was light, almost warm. It was as if the clouds had lifted, if only for her. She caught the midday bus, holding her handbag close, a single envelope inside, the letter she would leave behind. Back at home, she made herself a simple lunch. Cheese sandwich. Tomato soup. Claire was out shopping for scented candles. Oliver hadn't left the study all day. Joan moved quietly, but with a certain elegance, as if she were a guest in her own life for the last time. That evening, she gathered the children for their usual bedtime routine. One final story. One final kiss on the forehead. Isla clung to her arm. "Nana, do you have to sleep downstairs again?" Joan smiled. "Just for tonight, darling." She tucked them in with all the gentleness of a mother who'd done it for generations. Then she folded her shawl, packed her small suitcase, and placed it neatly beside the door. In the kitchen, she left the letter on the table, beside the biscuit tin and a new tin of dog treats. She labeled it with Claire's name, though she knew Oliver would read it first. The next morning, before the house stirred, Joan slipped out. She didn't look back. The kitchen was unusually still that morning. A shaft of soft light fell across the table where the envelope rested, plain white, unsealed, Claire's name written in neat, careful cursive. The air smelled faintly of toast, though no one had made any. Claire was the first to discover it. She wandered in wearing silk pajamas, scrolling on her phone, expecting the usual plate of sliced fruit and her decaf coffee just the way she liked it. Instead, there was silence, and the envelope. She picked it up, frowning slightly, and read the name. With a sigh, she tore it open, expecting a shopping list or perhaps another tedious note about using the correct recycling bin. But what she read was not that. Claire's eyes moved across the page slowly at first, then faster, until she stood frozen by the sink, lips parted, face pale. Oliver entered moments later, yawning, rubbing his eyes. "What's that?" he mumbled, reaching for the kettle. Claire didn't answer. She simply handed him the letter. As he read it, the color drained from his face too. Joan's words were calm, firm, without anger. She wrote of her years in the house, of raising Oliver, of opening her home without hesitation when they needed her. She spoke of the way she was spoken to, dismissed, sidelined. She wrote about the charity, about how Pause and Hope would now own the house, how it would be filled with wagging tails and second chances. She assured them she hadn't acted out of revenge, but out of clarity. She no longer belonged in a place where she was no longer seen. There was no return address. No plea for understanding. Just her signature at the end. Claire was pacing now, muttering, "She can't do that." "Can she do that?" Oliver didn't answer. He sat heavily at the table, still holding the letter. His eyes went to the biscuit tin beside it, the one Joan always kept full. Inside was nothing but air. By the time Claire reached for her phone to call her solicitor, Joan was already on the southbound train, her suitcase tucked beside her, watching the green fields roll past like waves. She hadn't said goodbye because goodbye would suggest a return. And she had no intention of coming back. The cottage in Brighton was small but perfect. 2 rooms, whitewashed walls, and a blue front door with a brass knocker in the shape of a fox. Joan arrived with a single suitcase and a string bag filled with tea, marmalade, and her favorite woolen socks. The landlord, a cheerful woman named Nancy, handed her the keys with a wink. "It's peaceful here," Nancy said. "You'll like the mornings. You can hear the seagulls before the town wakes up." Joan smiled, her shoulders loosening for the first time in years. The silence here was different. Not cold or dismissive, but soft, like the hush of a garden before bloom. Her days took on a quiet rhythm. Morning walks along the pebble shore, afternoon cups of tea by the window, evenings filled with books and the gentle crackle of the radio. No demands. No unspoken expectations. But she hadn't forgotten the dogs. 1 week after settling in, she caught the train back to the village, not to visit anyone, but to meet May at the gates of Pause and Hope. The old shelter was as cramped as ever, with barking from behind thin walls and volunteers weaving between crates of blankets and biscuits. May greeted her with a hug, eyes bright with news. "The papers came through," she beamed. "It's official. The house is ours. Joan, we've already got a plan for the first 10 dogs. And a vet surgery in the back room." They toured the property together the following day. Claire and Oliver had already vacated, their furniture gone, their presence erased. The house echoed differently now, emptier, yes, but no longer heavy. May walked the halls with wonder, already imagining kennels here, a play yard there. In the conservatory, she pointed at the sunlight pooling on the floor. "This will be the recovery room. The soft ones, the frightened ones, they'll heal here." Joan stood quietly, her hand resting on the doorframe. The same place she had once delivered trays of tea, her face ignored. Now, the walls would witness something better. Before leaving, she tucked a note into the biscuit tin she'd left behind. "For the next woman who gives too much. May this place return her kindness." Back in Brighton, the sea rolled and hissed against the stones. Joan sat on a bench with a dog by her side, a rescue named Toby with one eye and a limp. He pressed into her leg with the full trust of someone who'd been forgotten and remembered again. Spring came early that year in Brighton. Daffodils lined the coastal lanes, and the sea, once grey and wild, softened to a glassy blue. Joan found herself rising with the sun, her kettle whistling before most had stirred. Toby curled at her feet like he belonged there. News of the shelter's transformation travelled fast. Local papers printed photos of wagging tails beneath familiar gables, and an article titled, "Ashworth House to Hope House," made its rounds. Joan kept a copy folded inside her coat pocket. Not for pride, but as proof that something had changed, this time in her favour. She began volunteering again, quietly at first. Pause and Hope opened a small satellite adoption desk at the Brighton market on Saturdays, and Joan helped pair the shy ones with patient hands. Nobody asked her where she'd come from. They only asked which dog she thought needed love most. Sometimes she wondered if Oliver ever visited the shelter, if Claire had driven past the gate without recognizing it. But she didn't dwell on them. The silence from their end was no longer a wound, it was a relief. One morning, as she walked Toby through the dunes, she passed a little girl throwing pebbles into the sea. The girl turned and smiled. Her eyes were blue, like Isla's. But it wasn't her. And that was all right. Joan paused, took in the wind, the sky, the faint bark of dogs playing in the distance. She didn't need applause or redemption. She had breath in her lungs, sand beneath her boots, and a life that no longer asked her to shrink. She stood for a moment longer, then turned toward the path home. The brass fox on the door caught the sunlight as she reached it, warm beneath her hand.